Well, hi folks. Pleased you could join us again for our video cast, My Life with Robert Burns. I'm Douglas Mackenzie, and joining me for our interview today is my friend and colleague from Newcomer Burns Club, Jim Thompson. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Douglas. Hi, everybody.
We're using Zoom today to have conversations with our friends from around the Burns world, and we thought you'd like to drop in and listen to our conversation this morning. Today, our guest is former president of the World Federation and a very popular speaker at suppers all over the country. To tell us about his life with Robert Burns, please welcome Angus Middleton.
Well, good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here, and hopefully what I put before you will meet with your approval.
Thanks, Angus, and thanks for agreeing to be a guest on My Life with Robert Burns. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm back at work full time. I've had a busy week, so a pile of paperwork to attend to after I finish today. But staying safe, but obviously a changed world that we're in, sadly.
Very good. For those that don't already know you, Angus, could you maybe tell us a wee bit about yourself?
Surely. I was born in Kilwinning at Buckreddon Maternity Home, which is now a nursing home in the cultural capital of Ayrshire, Kilwinning. So I've got a wee soft spot for the Buffs, for Kilwinning Rangers, because of that. But grew up in West Kilbride, which was a great village, still is a great village, but to be brought up in West Kilbride, attending a local primary school, lovely. Great memories from that, great group of friends. It was a very settled place. It was slightly, it had a lot of influx of workers that from down south who came into work in ICI and at Hunterston. So it was a real mixed bag. You had the locals, and then you had a bit of money coming into Seamill and West Kilbride, and it was a tremendous place, great community spirit in the village. Attended West Kilbride Primary, and then on to Ardrossan Academy. That was my two schools. And on leaving school with the massive 3 O-levels, so I could underperform there because all the boys I cut about with were pretty bright. But Ardrossan Academy, it just seemed to be a carry on. It was, when I think back, it was unbelievable. It was wild. And we were sheltered wee boys from a small village down there, Ardrossan, Saltcoats, and some from Stevenson as well. And Ardrossan Academy had previously been a high-performing school up there with Ayr Academy and Kilmarnock Academy. And in fact, the teachers still had the gowns on and the mortarboards when I attended in 1972. But the other boys in my class, they seemed so streetwise. We were just like young boys, really. So it was an eye-opener, and but I did enjoy it. And I went right through Ardrossan Academy without being involved in a scrap of any kind, which is quite an achievement. But that was due to the boys that I was running about with. There was a squad of us that all stuck together, and great memories from my childhood that way.
And what happened after school?
Yeah, at that time, 76, 77, I would say every single tradesman in our village were offering apprenticeships. So every one of the group of boys that I ran about with, one became a plumber, one got a job as a greenkeeper, one became a blacksmith, one was a car mechanic, the other was an electrician, all within the village. And I was fortunate enough to get myself a job with Jimmy Richardson as an apprentice joiner in the village. And you think that just doesn't happen today. So in the world we're in now, for young people to get jobs, very difficult. And but back then, you had the pick of the stall. You could have got a job as anything. And it was a 4-year apprenticeship with Jimmy Richardson. And after my time was out, I continued working with him up until another 2 years. And then I had a change of career direction where I became what's called a specialist surveyor in the building preservation industry. So with my joinery skills, I went to work with a building preservation company down in Irvine called Samuel H. Duncan, who were well established, and I trained as a surveyor with him. And
did that's require specialist training? Did that involve going to college or something like that?
Yeah, it did. So over the years, next years I was sat, there's national qualifications go with that. One was up at TRADA, the Timber Research and Development Association up in Stirling. Another was down in Oldham College of Technology, which was run by the British Chemical Damp-Proof Course Association, separate ones for that. And there are different modules, and eventually it builds up to you're called this certificated surveyor and remedial treatment. And my whole life has been spent in building preservation. I'm a very committed guy, and when I get into something, I get right into it, and I still love it. I'm still very enthusiastic. Building trade gets a bad reputation, but there's a lot of cracking guys in the building trade, a lot of very honest people out there striving to do not just the best for themselves, but the best for the customer. So I'm still proud to be part of that, and I'll continue. That's me. Yeah.
And that led to you establishing your own business.
Yes, I did. I'd landed myself a good number with a national preservation company called Richardson and Starling, who were really top end, biggest preservation company in Scotland, and nobody left them. They had tremendous loyalty, and all the colleagues were good. Girls in the office, your fellow surveyors, the management, they were all excellent people. And I was there for about 10 years, and that company car, final salary, pension, happy days. But one of our surveyors got a very bad injury. He fell off a ladder in an empty house. And after a conversation with him, he broke his femur, a bad one. And after a conversation with him, I asked him if he had any regrets, because you need to be fit for this game that I'm in. And he did. He said he never started his own business. He was scared of failure. And this man would have made it. He was a top end guy. And I said, well, I always thought I'd have my own business, but no need to, because I've got a job here that I enjoy and guaranteed your money, and very contented. But he said to me, if I was you, I would start my own business. And I couldn't get this out of my head, and I decided that I was going to go. And this was quite a big thing. They weren't expecting me to leave. I'm a very loyal person. And I handed in my notice to much disbelief. And the very next day was 9/11. So the 9/11 atrocity happened. I was going to a survey in Prestwick, and that's what was on the screen when I went in the guy's house.
Wow.
That was a wake-up call for me, that I think we all thought the world was going to end then, never mind now. And so anyway, that was it. And the first job I went to see for a customer, I got it, and I've never got to my last job yet.
Oh.
So I mean, just getting into year 20 on my own.
That's excellent. Well, you better give the business a mention in case there's potential customers out there.
Well, it's got a funny name, and the reason why, I asked people what they thought of preservation and what they thought of conservation, and they were all saying castles and monuments. They weren't thinking it was just the wee lady or the man with the damp problem in his house that he couldn't get rid of. So that's why I called it Damp and Decay. Angus Middleton, I wanted that to be in there. Now, that's not a Hollywood name that I've got, Angus Middleton, but it's a name that by association people say, I think that's that boy that we had before. And then the Damp and Decay was so it was quite clear what I was doing. So I do woodworm and dry rot, rising damp, and woodworm's a big part of my world. So entomology and mycology, that's what I do. And preserving high standards, that's a wee strap line with my company. And I strive to do my best to do that.
Good. And you've got a couple of ologies in there, which is a good thing.
A couple of ologies?
Yeah. Entomology.
That's it. The study of insects. That's it. Yeah, the common furniture beetle. And this is its flight season just now. It's out there. And if you, geographically, in the whole of the UK, Greenock and the West Coast is the perfect place for woodworm or the common furniture beetle. And Nobium punctatum, that's its Latin name, that is the perfect place for it to thrive. So thankfully I'm set up in the right neck of the woods here in Skelmerley, where I now live. Although my heart's very much in West Kilbride. And my wee brother Gordon, you know Gordon, Gordon's he's a bricklayer to trade and runs a very successful building company. And Gordon gives me a hard time because I moved up to Skelmerley along with Jimmy Law, and because it's got a PA postcode. It's in North Ayrshire. But Gordon sends me a birthday card. He'll say Angus Middleton, gives me the address, and he'll say Skelmerley near Greenock. But we're very much, we're the North Ayrshire boys right up here on the border of Inverclade. Nice
Very
bit
good.
of work.
You better just finish off this wee bit by telling us a bit about your the person you're sharing your life with, and also maybe tell us a wee bit about your other interest in football.
Yeah, well, Tracy and I actually have been together for 30 years. 30 years on the 12th of July. Couldn't get a band that day. And 30 years, and we've been engaged for 27 years. Now that's quite a record. No reason that we're still engaged. We don't have any children. I think if we had children, we'd have get married. Tracy's mad on cats, and I wasn't. I was not a lover of cats at all. But she's a hard-working girl. She's involved in the IT world with a national banking company, Clydesdale Bank, soon to become Virgin Money, and that's who Tracy works up in Queen Street in Glasgow with them. And she's into the kind of folk scene, and I'm very much, and obviously as we know, into the Burns world. But prior to my wee Burns story, which I'll do with Jim, I actually met Joe Kennedy as a football referee. That's the first place I met Joe, was at Rugby Park in Kilmarnock, where we trained every Tuesday night with the Ayrshire Referees Association. So I refereed Ayrshire Amateurs and Ayrshire Juniors, and it's amazing how many of the ex-players that you meet at suppers, at Burns suppers as you go forward, and they're always up to tell you of the day that you sent them off. But I only sent off, would you believe, in 15 seasons, 5 players. I was very much in the side. West Kilbride Amateurs, that was my big love as an amateur football team, and they're still going. Kilbride, they've been going since 1946, so they were a bit rough and tumble. So I always sort of sided with the clubs and the players, and I feel for the juniors and the amateurs just now because of the lockdown. It's hard enough for the senior clubs to get back training and back playing, but the junior club set up in Ayrshire, they're all moving into the west of Scotland. It's so massive and big, yet without the paying customer going through the gate, it's going to be very difficult for the Talbots, the Cumnocks, the Glens, the Buffs, Meadow, big clubs, Kilburn, Layside, massive crowds. But if they can't get them back through the gate, it's going to be a challenge.
It's going to be really hard.
Yeah.
But you've given us a bit of background there that I'm sure a lot of people don't know about you. So. But let's get on to the Burns stuff, and I'll get Jim to maybe explore your Burns interest a bit more.
Thank you, Douglas.
Angus, I remember driving one night with Joe Kennedy. I forget where we were going. It was the usual Burns season going somewhere. Sandy Drain sitting in the back. And we were talking about you.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, that boy was the best young referee in Scotland at one point in time. And he gave me reasons why he sort of didn't continue, which were perfectly understandable. And he says, you know, football misses him more than he misses it. And I think he's probably right there. But however, how did you get started with Burns?
Very lucky. I've been thinking during this lockdown, how can we get because we're going to have a lost generation here, how can we get the young boys and girls to embrace this as young adults in the future? So at West Kilbride Primary, we did have a Burns competition. And it was actually not organised by the teachers. It was organised by West Kilbride Burns Club. They stewarded it and judged it, presented the prizes. But that only started in primary 6. So it was only pupils from primary 6 and primary 7. And I was fortunate in primary 6. It was The Sair Finger by Walter Wingate, who I didn't know at the time. He was actually born in Dalry in Ayrshire. And Dalry's got a great Burns heritage. So that was a poem for recitation, but I also was a reasonable singer at that time, and it was Scots Wahey. And for some reason, boys were to do it as duets. And it was myself and a boy called Alistair Mauchlan. And Ali, in later life, is a very determined guy. He was the kind of leader of our gang, we Ali, and he signed with Kilmarnock, Motherwell, Leicester City, the whole career as a footballer. But we were singing this Scots Wahey, and we were fortunate enough to win it. But another boy that we were friendly with through the Boys Brigade in West Kilbride is massive, still is, and everybody was in the BB in Kilbride. But this boy, Robert Wilson, his grandpa had died, and he left in his will two things, two items to Robert. One was a Golden Goose putter for the golfers out there, and the other was an Edinburgh edition of Robert Burns. And as young boys, we had this Edinburgh edition valued about £250,000. We thought, oh, this was, if only it had been a Kilmarnock, but you would get an Edinburgh edition today probably for £1,000 or thereabouts, a high hundreds, maybe £1,100-1,200, but it's still a valuable book. And Robert had that out. We were out playing. He would bring this Edinburgh edition out, and it was a genuine Edinburgh edition. So that gave us with sort of a deeper knowledge of Burns because of this, because we'd handled this book. But then when I went to Drossen Academy, they didn't have a Burns competition as such, but we got it in English class, and we also had a music teacher by the name of Ken Hetherington, and said earlier on, it was just a riot at the school. He was a forward-thinking teacher. He introduced us to music that we didn't necessarily like. So all the boys that were into kind of more pop music, he said, I'll convince you why you should like heavy metal. So a lot of the rugby boys were into heavy metal. So it was Pink Floyd, The Wall, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, then Band on the Run by Wings had just come out, and he was to dissect each of these over the weeks. And then this particular week, he brought an album, and it was Wallace Arnold. It was an orchestral recording set to Tam O'Shanter, and he recited this parts of Tam O'Shanter along with this orchestra. And it was something like the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and that was my first introduction to Tam O'Shanter by Robert Burns, and he brought it alive. And that's always a bit about speakers and performers. The top end ones, they bring it alive, and you feel as if they're speaking to you personally. And that's what I've loved, and that's what I try to achieve with my own style. Gordon and I both speak almost identically, and I put that down to my grandpa, my mum's father. He was knocked down as a relatively young man, and he was left hard of hearing. So we were always told to speak clearly and not to mumble, no mumbling, but to look at grandpa. So see the amount of people that have come up to me at the end of events, not just suppers, inter-club nights or any event that I'm speaking at, they'll come up and say to me, particularly elderly people, I heard every single word you were saying. And I put that down to that. So that, my unfortunate grandfather, that has helped me as an orator, if you like. So this sort of clear, distinct voice, that I put that down to that. And that's important, because if you engage with your audience, particularly the audiences that we're speaking to, then they'll run with you.
Engagement is essential. You'll remember your first Burns supper, I take it then?
I do. Why I got into it was I joined the craft when I was 21. So I joined the Masons when I was 21. You're allowed to join at 18. If your father's in the Masonic, you can join at 21. My father was, but I joined, the time was right for me. I joined at 21, and we attended suppers. It was a mixed supper in the local village in our Masons Hall, and with a group of boys, five or six of us, for a decade almost. We were there every single year, and it was top end speakers that was arranged through the provincial, and they were guys that were maybe coming from, for example, from Bolton, from Dolmellington, from Cumnock, Ayr and Kilmarnock. So we were getting the cream of the crop coming up to speak in West Kilbride. So really, really enjoyable nights. And we loved it. We loved the harmony. We loved the friendship and the discipline. I like that side of it. But you can have a good laugh as well at a Burns supper. That's the thing. Folk that have never been before think it'll all be awful serious. But when you go to the chair, which I was when I was 31, you had to chair the Burns supper. And so I learned Address to a Haggis. That was my first Burns poem. Chaired it. I asked the aforementioned R.K. Wilson to do Tam O'Shanter, the boy with the Edinburgh edition. That was him making his debut. And I asked another boy who I was friendly with through the refereeing, Alan Saunderson. And Alan's better known now. He was a referee. He was an awful man for the Red Guard. He was different from me, but he now does services for funerals, and he's in much demand. Originally from Kilburnie, but now lives in Largs. And Alan asked him to do the Immortal Memory. So the three of us made our debut on that night at my first Burns supper, and loved it. And at the end of the supper, great night, a lady came up and asked me if I would do it at the Women's Guild, address the haggis. And when I was at the addressing the haggis at the Women's Guild, a member of the bowling club came up and said, would I do the haggis at their bowling club? And that was it. If nobody had asked me, it might never have started. And I loved it. I loved being part of the top table, getting piped in, the whole rigmarole. And then before you knew it, locally, it was all very local. And then you started going maybe to Dalry or maybe to Largs, for example. But it could all have ended for me. And I wanted to include this story in it because this is where my Burns career could have ended. I had been at Dundonald Burns Club and to do Tam Shanter, and through doing that, I was asked to go to Irvine Police Burns Supper. Now, Irvine Police Burns Supper, I only know now as an adult, was perhaps not quite as at the top of the tree as the Ayr Police Burns Supper, as we call it, but it was Irvine Burns Supper. To me, that night I went down to the volunteer rooms in Irvine, which for those who know it's a big barn of a place, a big hall, chalked to the gunnels, serving officers with all the bread, and I didn't know anybody, didn't know a single soul. And I picked up the programme, and it was the president of the Robert Burns World Federation who was proposing the Immortal Memory, and it was a member of the Ayrshire Association of Burns Clubs that was doing the toast to the lassies. Now, I come across as a very confident guy, but I have the same doubts of your ability as even Robert Burns did. We all have that, it's human nature. And I picked up that programme, and I honestly felt I was a fish out of water. And one of the retired officers came over, Andrew Jess, who Jim will know, and Andrew came across, and he was to take me under his wing, and he said to me, you'll need to be good tonight, son. And I says, I'll do my best. And he just paused and he says, your best maybe no be good enough. See my heart, oh, no. I said, this is a nightmare. See, if they'd said to me there was a taxi outside to take me up the road, I think there's a good chance I'd get in it. I just thought, oh. So.
And what did you do that night? What was your... I was
doing Tam Shanter. And my stomach was churning. So up I went, and I gave everything to Tam Shanter. It was full of colour, and standing ovation. The plumbing up, tremendous. What a feeling I got. Folk coming up at the end, and what a payback. And fellow performers will understand that, you know, that, and you know when you've nailed it, and you also know sometimes when you're maybe just not been as good as what you would have liked to have been, and it's all on the night. So as we went up the road that night after it, I thought, I love that. I just absolutely loved it. So that was a crossroads for me. That could have gone either way. Yeah. But
could that be a crossroads for us as well? Is that an opportunity for you to give us a couple of lines for Tam Shanter just for our audience?
Well, I like this verse. But pleasures are like poppy spread. You seize the flower, its bloom is shed, or like the snow falls in the river, a moment white, then melts forever. Now, I would say for anyone to learn a poem, that was the second poem that I ever learned. Burns poem. Went from Address to a Haggis to Tam Shanter. Now, that's a bit silly, actually. You should start with a stepping stone or two before you get to that. But if anybody out there, purely for a memory test, to learn Tam Shanter, to get it into memory, I would heartily recommend it. It's a very satisfying thing, even just to sit at a Burns supper and run it over in your head along with the performer on that night, or certainly learn parts of it, the better verses. Burns said it was his greatest ever work, and it's certainly, when it's performed well, it's very, very enjoyable. That opened doors for me, of that there's no doubt, because I was young and I was enthusiastic, and I've never charged for a Burns supper, never will charge. That's my choice. Some people do it. I don't. I think we've got this duty to keep it going, to keep the whole cult going. And so I'm kind of charity-minded kind of person. That's through the Masonic bit. Put it into your charity, keep the club going. And I was attending, but this time word goes round, there's somebody new, and that's what happens. It's great when somebody new comes along. And it was through that I met Jimmy Gibson. And Jimmy was a very committed person for the Federation, for the Burns Federation, or the Robert Burns World Federation as we now know it. And he was very committed to the Ayrshire Association. And Jim, Kilmarnock number nothing, very much a Kilmarnock man. And he had a word with me, and he said, I wasn't a member of Burns Club. And now there's a lot of guys out there, top end performers. That's about the third time I've said top end. You don't realise how often you say something until you're thinking about it. Some of the boys and girls, that are on the Burns Supper scene, they're not members of Burns clubs. They're just Burnsians in their own right. And I could see them as being individual members of the Robert Burns World Federation. That could be their natural home. But perhaps not everybody likes the club scene. It's challenging at times, all the internal politics that go with it. But some of the men that you meet, they're not members of Burns clubs, but they know they're Burns. And that was, Jimmy pointed me, and that's how Leslie Dyack, as she was at the time, Leslie Richardson, her grandpa had been a president of West Kilbride Burns Club. West Kilbride's not really a Burns place, not in the way that the likes of New Cumnock is, or Mauchline is, or Alloway. See the places where Burns has the story, the Turbolton connection, that's where Burns lived, and you feel as if you're following in his footsteps. But West Kilbride Burns Club was really an extension of the Flower Show, and maybe the Curling Club. Nice folk, decent folk, and but they had their supper, or their dinner as we called it, at the Seamill Hydro every year, and Leslie and I got involved to not take it over, but we ignited energy into it, and that's what really opened the doors to the Burns world that I've embraced. And we loved it. We took the attendance up to over 300 at it, but it'll find its natural level. 300 is, half of them were there for the Ceilidh band, to be honest. We had some excellent Ceilidh bands as well, and we were able to attract some, because that's the beauty of being part of the Burns world. You meet other Burns speakers, and I love it when a Burns supper, when the secretary has picked well, when they pick the right person for the memory, the correct person for the toast to the lassies, a very suitable reply, and then the strongest person for, say, it's Holy Willie or the Haggis. See, when you put all that together, you know at the beginning, when you look at the programme, you think, we're going to be in for a cracker here tonight. And I've never tired of a good Burns supper, never.
You'll have an awful lot of Burns supper highlights under your belt as well. I mean, I've seen you at some, I mean, I saw you getting a standing ovation at the Polish Burns supper, 400 men on their feet for fully about 3 or 4 minutes. Yeah. And that was a wonderful memory that night. And it's probably the same memories you do regularly, but there was just something different that night.
Well, you don't know this story, and I don't think a lot of folk will. There's a handful of people who will know this. Why that came about, the night before, when the Friday night of that particular week, I was at Cooper Burns Club through in Fife, and they meet in the Corn Exchange, and that's 250, all male, very well organised. They all wear the Burns check tie, the shepherd's check. So when you look down from the stage, it's a mass of these ties that George Letham and Bob Stewart have sold via the Federation office over the years. I was doing the memory in there on the Friday night. Then on the Saturday, I was going to George Square for the wreath laying at 12 noon, and went there. And then, of course, Air Police Burns Supper, it runs like clockwork. You're not allowed to drive. Now, I'm not a drinker, so I drive to Burns Suppers all the time. But, of course, the police send a taxi for you, and it's to the second. It's booked. So I comes in the house, run in the house, jumped in the bath, had a shave, and I played my answer phone, because I've always got messages, whether it's through my work or whether it's through speaking engagements. And it was the secretary of Cooper Burns Club, Tom Green, to say that I had left my notes on the stage in the Corn Exchange. Now, see these notes, they were the notes. They were the only notes. I get picked up at 5:30 to go down to Troon, to the concert hall, or the Walker Hall, as it's commonly known, and I didn't have any other notes. So they told me my immortal memory was to be 22 minutes, and there's a big clock in the centre there, but you get put in the spotlight, a wee bit like today, you get put in the spotlight, you can't see the clock, and for the first time ever, I performed an immortal memory with no notes, and I was so technically flying by the seat of my pants, and you know that they say about the graceful swan, but the feet are paddling in below. That's what it was like, and thankfully Burns was with me that night, and I just loved it in there.
That just shows your real talent, and also your knowledge of your subject.
A man in our village, he said to me once, he goes, "You've got a kind of gift as an off-the-cuff speaker." And he paused and he said, "The off-the-cuff speakers are always the best rehearsed."
Yeah.
And that's it. I'll work at it.
I remember distinctly, I was asked to do the resurgence of the Rangers Burns Supper, and I invited you to come along, and Jimmy.
Yeah.
And Jimmy and I are walking out of that night, trying to persuade you to come to the Polish Burns Supper.
I know.
The immortal memory.
Yeah.
And it took some persuading.
It did.
And it was one of the few nights I wasn't speaking at the Police Burns Supper.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there with friends, and I turned round to Bill Stafford, whom you know,
Yeah.
and I says to Bill, I says, "Christ, but you know, that was worth the 20 minutes batter to get him up there." Because it really was.
And do you know why, Jim? I didn't agree to you, because I had already had a commitment for that night, and I pride myself. I've never cancelled a Burns Supper or a lesser Burns Supper for a better one. Whatever's in my diary, that's it. I'll be there. Ian Farrell says Angus would go to a Burns Supper in a phone box, and that's about right. I'll be there. And a lot of guys will no go near pubs. They'll no go near the rough and tumble. I love that. I love that, as well as the very formal ones. But the particular supper, I won't name it, but the particular supper that I had in my diary, I actually was lucky enough to be invited back there last year to do the memory. So all things ended well. But the Irvine Place Burns Supper was a step in the right direction for me, and it's all experience. And it was through that experience that enabled me on that night. You don't get invited to the Ayr Police Burns Supper unless you're tried and tested, because that's an example of, it's the who's who of the Burns world, and I've had them all in there. It's a cracker. I've got a wee list actually. I'll just run these past you. I'll touch on them. Top of the list, I could show you. I've got Ayr Police, Bridgeton Burns Club by number in Glasgow, Greenock Burns Club, the mother club, which you've been, Jim. They've got the heritage. They love their Burns. The mother club, Belfast Association Burns Club, which was in Stormont. That was another great, because they were very committed, and they came over faithfully and still do. Margaret Stokes still comes over to do her calligraphy at the schools competition, which I love the schools competition, both at Ayrshire Association and national levels. And of course, my two overseas trips, being to Atlanta Burns Club to speak in there. They've got the replica of Burns Cottage, and to Calgary Burns Club in the convention centre in Calgary. Joe used to say, and it's not with disrespect, the further you go away from the heartland and the more expensive the ticket, it doesn't mean to say that it's going to be the best of Burns suppers. And there's something in that when you're speaking locally to really knowledgeable Burnsians. They want to be challenged, and I like that as well. So you can give quite a simple, straightforward immortal memory, or you can give a more challenging one. I would say my immortal memory is quite light, because there's no point in trying to impress one person in that room. I want to encourage people to come back to Burns suppers, and that's where my 22 minutes is always my favourite thing. And but last year, we're talking about last Burns season, I was at one at the Afton Lily in Newcomnott, And that night I went in. I'll give you a wee quick rundown of the programme. This to me was an evening that could not fail. It was chaired by Hugh McHarg. We had myself doing the memory. We had Willie Dick doing the Toast to the Lassies. We had Jean Hillhouse doing the reply to the Toast to the Lassies. We had Tommy Cooper, Jimmy Law, doing the recitations. We had Ian Sloan, president of Newcombe Burns Club, doing To a Rich Good Nicht. And we had Buller Reid doing the Drouthy Cronies. And we were suitably looked after by Budgie. And what a night that was. And Jimmy Law and I were going down the next day to judge at the Dumfries and Galloway Burns Association Schools competition. And when we got up in the morning, we were absolutely buzzing of that night before. And yet we would be determined as long-term, experienced Burnsians, you know, seen it all before, yet you can still get that lift. And that's why the Burns Supper has lasted since 1801. And how it will. We've had bigger challenges than what we've got just now, and it'll come through this as well, and it'll keep going. We may have to tweak things, but tweak it we will.
So you've been to quite a lot of suppers, Angus. And you must have covered many poems in that time. Yep. You gave us a bit of Tam Shanter earlier on. Is there another poem that's your favourite, or one you'd like to give us a couple of verses from?
Yes, I do have a few favourites actually, but The Soldier's Return, to me, I like it because it's very accessible. It's a nice bit of social history. I always love that, connecting with the past. And the folks say that Burns' poetry, it's as relevant today as it ever was. And it is, because he talks about life, death, he talks about employment, unemployment, and all the natural challenges that are faced within families. And Burns had a fascination with uniform. And of course, we all know that when he was struggling in his deathbed, he was concerned about the price of the militia uniform that was outstanding when he was down there in Dumfries. And the first time I'd never heard The Soldier's Return, and it was Willie Morrison that recited it down at the Tristing Thorn down there at Lake Coylton, or Lake Colton as they call it. Coylton used to have a Burns Club called the Tristing Thorn Burns Club. And when I heard Willie recite that, the hairs in the back of my neck, you know that way you almost get kind of goosebumps when you hear something really special. And I get in the car and I said, I'm going to learn that. It was so nice. And of course, Willie Stewart, the great Willie Stewart, lovely singer. And you hear Willie singing at a Burns supper at midnight, and it's been a full and rowdy evening, yet you could hear a pin drop when he gets up to do his Burns medley. And one night I heard Willie singing The Soldier's Return. And of course, it's on his CD that he brought out. And it is a song. And a lot of Burns work is songs that are suitable for poetry. And so I decided I would learn it. And because not a lot of people could do it, it's always a handy one to have up your sleeve than the old Hardy Annuals. So I looked for that, and that's where I stumbled across my other one, To Robert Aiken, which, unbeknown to me, it wasn't penned by Burns. I even asked Peter Westwood about that, and he said it's not in Burns. There's not a manuscript of it, yet it's in the Collins book, the complete works of Burns poems and songs. And so I learned that, and I'd never heard anyone recite it before. And I then became this unofficial president of the Robert Aiken Appreciation Society. And that was just my pure, it was actually just a bit of fate that I was with Willie McPike, and Willie McPike was a great Burns man, a senior police officer like Jim, and I asked him what poems I should study, what poems should I learn. And he said To Mary in Heaven was one, and the other one was The Slave's Lament, and particularly relevant in the world that we're living in today. And he said that you should pick out one of the heroes or one of the colleagues, the fellows, you could pick MD, you could pick Davy Siller, you could pick Dr. John Mackenzie, you could pick John Syme, you could pick any of these guys and try and plot their life through the Burns story, and it makes you more knowledgeable. And I went down that road because of the Burns quiz. And I love the Burns quiz. I could go to a Burns quiz every week. And that's a very competitive thing. But the more you find out, the more you realise how little you know. And one night, Skemley, Pussy Nancy's, they meet the first Monday of every month in the wee village pub, the Eglinton. And this man came in, this is a true story, this man came in and he said to the owner, "What's on in there?" And he said, "That's the Burns Club. They meet in there every Monday." Well, we don't actually meet in there every Monday, but it's the first Monday of the month. To which the visitor said, "You would think they would run out of material." And we all burst out laughing. I have to say, run out of material. You could talk about Burns for now till the coos come home, and you still would just be scratching the surface. And that's how Jim put his book out, In and Out of Shanter. There is so much out there. Yeah. So I'll give you a verse or two of The Soldier's Return. And Bert McGregor said to me, Bert McGregor of Auckland, he's some boy. Bert says, "Get out into Burns country." And that's what I would say, that people take your grandchildren round the Burns sites, introduce them to it, and hopefully that wee seed will get planted for the future generations. The Soldier's Return by Robert Burns. When wild war's deadly blast was blown, and gentle peace returning, with many a sweet babe fatherless, and many a widow mourning, I left the lines in tented field, where lang had been a lodger, my humble knapsack, all my wealth, a poor but honest sojer. A leal light heart was in my breast, my hand unstained with plunder, and for fair Scotia I came again, I cheery on did wander. I thought upon the banks of Coyle, I thought upon my Nancy, and I mind the witching smile that caught my youth for fancy. At length I reached the bonny glen, where early life I sported. I passed the mill and trysting thorn, where Nancy aft I courted. And I'll cut out at that there. A wee taster. If you've got a Burns book in the house, if you're listening to this, pick it up, read The Soldier's Return. A wee bit of social history. It's a wee bit like tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree. That's my take on it. And of course, it's still there today. It's not the original hawthorn bush, but certainly it's been a cutting that's been taken off it, because souvenir hunters were taking bits off it and taking them away. I was heading to Canada and America. They were taking bits of the trysting thorn when they returned. So that's it. Heartily commend works. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for that, Angus. And that's a great way to finish off the first episode of our conversation with you about your life with Robert Burns. Yeah. So thank you for giving us some time. I'm sure we'll have many, many other stories in a subsequent episode. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Douglas, and thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.